I'm still smiling in this picture, so. It just makes me remember that there were good times. We had so much fun in the beginning. We spent a lot of time together and we hung out and played games. In the beginning, it was just a lot of fun then. I don't know, I just feel stupid saying there were good times. Like, how could there have been good times? But, I mean, there were. I think from the very moment I met him, he was playing a role. Looking at this picture, if I could go back, I would tell that girl to run as far away from that man as she could. The day that I met Ray, living in Ohio, and I have my house with my 2 kids. I was pretty kind of lost and broken and just searching, I guess, for myself or something. I was single. I had just gotten out of a relationship, and I didn't know who I was anymore. I really didn't feel like I had a purpose in life. I just was kind of existing and floating through life. Meeting Ray was completely random. A mutual friend of ours had a gathering at her house, and I had went over there. He was nice and funny, and he seemed caring, and he seemed like he was attentive, and he seemed like a nice guy. I don't think I've ever really laughed so much with anybody. I didn't want to stop talking to him. I didn't want him to go home. And I was kind of opening up to him about what was going on in my life, and he said he'd be there and kind of help get me through it, and just kind of seemed like a very, very caring person, and that made me want to get to know him more and spend more time with him. I did not realize that I was literally giving him everything that he was going to use against me on a silver platter. Maybe it's because you're so lost, they seem so perfect, I don't know. I thought I was opening up and actually connecting with someone. I didn't know who he was going to turn out to be. Pretty early on, I knew that he had been previously married, but he had been divorced for a long time. We were pretty much together almost every day. We would go fishing and go walk and hang out in the parks, go out to the bars and have drinks. One night, Ray and I were out at the bar drinking, and then all of a sudden, Ray opened up a little bit about his past to me.
There's something I gotta tell you.
And told me that he had a kidnapping charge that he had spent some time in jail for. After he said that, I really didn't know what to believe.
Something I'm not proud of.
I was, I think, still in just shock, and my heart sank. He told me that his ex-wife was dating somebody new, and that person had hit their child, one of their sons. So he went over there to fight the person and drug him out of the house and beat him up. So he told me that he got a kidnapping charge for dragging the guy out of the house. Not the best thing, but in my mind, it was, okay, I guess you're defending your kid. Not the best way to do it, but okay. I understand, maybe I wouldn't go to that extremes too, but you're sticking up for your kid, and it was a long time ago, so I'm not gonna judge you on something that you were honest with me about. But I think that should have been my warning sign. I wish I would have known the full story. I really wish I would have asked more questions. I wish I would have been not so trusting. Later on, his ex-wife contacted me, and we've talked, and I do know what the real story is. He actually kidnapped her and took her to a cemetery, drug her around by her hair, and told her to pick out her own grave. We had gone to a birthday party, and there was a guy that came on a motorcycle. And I don't know, I love motorcycles. My parents have motorcycles. I grew up around them. It had been a long time since I had taken a ride on a bike. So I was pretty excited about it. I asked him to take me for a ride around the block on his motorcycle.
Would you mind?
Not at all.
Ray actually was standing right there when I asked.
There you go.
And apparently that was not the correct thing to do. Kind of didn't look happy, but he didn't like immediately yell at me or anything like that. He just kind of was a little sulky, and then I just all of a sudden noticed that he was gone. At first, I just thought, I'm like, oh, okay, he got mad about something. So I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Then I realized he actually left me at that party, and I had to get a taxi home. I mean, I guess I should have thought he left me there, but I really honestly didn't know why. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Let me go home and find out what's going on. When I got home, he told me how disrespectful that was, that I should never, ever disrespect him like that again, that no man was gonna take his lady out on a bike. And then Ray got very, very upset.
You thought you were slick?
It was just a motorcycle ride.
And we get into an argument, and he just all of a sudden came at me from behind. He had my shoulders pinned down. I'm remembering the look on his face, how mad and angry he was. It was scary and shocking, like this whole other side of him that I had not ever seen before. He was punching me in the face. I remember asking him to stop, telling him to stop hitting me. But then I finally got away. I ran down to my neighbor's house. They came down to help me, but he had taken off. And the neighbors wanted to call the police, but I didn't let them, and I did not call the police. At that time, I was embarrassed. I was confused, and I really still at that time was struggling with, that's not really him. And then Ray began sending me messages, apologizing and promising to change and be a better person. He even encouraged me to call the cops on him. He told me that I should call the cops on him because he deserved to be in trouble for what he did. And I told him, no, I'm not gonna do that to you, because at the time I saw it as remorse, not manipulation, but that's how good of a manipulator he is. Like, I thought maybe, that was just a one-time thing. People have bad nights and do stupid things when they're drinking. So I fully did believe that it was not going to happen again. I wish I knew then what I know now. Ray God wanted us to work on our relationship and continue to try to work on being a couple. At some point, we started talking about marriage, and we decided that we were just going to go downtown and get married. I was very nervous, very hesitant, very second-guessing myself, but at that time kind of scared to not go through with it because I didn't want to upset him, and I didn't know how he would react if I told him that I didn't want to anymore. So I went through with it, and we got married. Once we got married, Ray moved into my house with me. Things were pretty good at first. We got along pretty good, had a lot of fun. I thought that being married would make us closer and make our relationship stronger. I didn't think anything bad was gonna happen again. In the morning, I was trying to wake him up, and he was sleeping, and I was shaking him on his back.
Hey, Ray, wake up.
And he kind of rolled over, and my hands kind of got trapped between him and the couch. And when I pulled my hands out, it scratched his back. It wasn't anything serious. He just kind of looked at me, and I just woke him up and told him it was time to get up and go to work. It's a little awkward, but not like hostile or anything like that. I, again, didn't think anything of it and went about getting ready for my day. And all of a sudden there is a knock on the front door, and it's the police. He called the police and told them that I had attacked him. I remember, I was thinking, are you serious? Like, what is going on here? Like, there was no yelling, there was no fighting. I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, I didn't do anything. I didn't put my hands on him. They're like, well, he has scratches on his back. I was like, I literally was waking him up on the couch.
Hey!
I explained to them exactly what happened. He just kind of stood there and let it all happen. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, you're taking me to jail over a scratch on somebody's back. He didn't try to help me at all until I was in the handcuffs.
Ray, please!
All right, officers. All right.
Then he tried to be the savior and, oh, please don't arrest her. I didn't mean to call you guys. It wasn't that bad. And then it was the nice guy that was gonna save me from the situation that he put me in. I was furious. It didn't make sense to me why he did this to me when I didn't call the police on him when he had beaten me so terribly before. Looking back, I think Ray was just trying to teach me that I had to do what he wanted, that it was his way, that if I didn't comply with him, that I was gonna be taught some kind of lesson. He was gonna do something to show me that I did something wrong. Shortly after Christmas, my daughter had a friend staying the night. It was one of those nights he was on the couch, I was in the bedroom. We weren't really hanging out or talking. When I got home and I first got my daughter and her friend situated in her bedroom and go and look at my room, and I was just like kind of shocked. The bedroom door had been kicked in, my mattress has been flipped over, he's rifled through all of my things. There's things thrown about the room like he's searching for something that I don't know what he's searching for. It looks like a mini tornado had went through my bedroom. So then I asked him, like, what's going on? Why are you doing that?
What is wrong with you?
And he just immediately starts telling me that I'm hiding stuff from him in the bedroom, and like, but he can't tell me what I'm hiding.
I know you're sneaking around.
What are you talking about?
We get into an argument. He always wanted to know what I was doing and where I was, and I guess he felt like he didn't know something. And he pushes me down on the couch. I'm very upset. I don't know what he's gonna do. Like, he gets angry and goes off on the deep end. And he's kind of antagonizing me, like, what are you gonna do? So I had my little pocket knife in my hand, and I'm telling him, if you put your hands on me again, I said, I'm gonna defend myself. I'm going outside, get out of my way. I kind of just walked around him and went outside to the patio. I didn't know this at the time, but my daughter had saw Ray push me, and she called the police. So the police show up. They told me that Ray had showed them a video of us arguing in the kitchen with me with a knife in my hand, and I took a step towards him, which was threatening towards him, so that they had to arrest me for domestic violence. He just had his phone in his hand. I didn't even know that he was recording. My plan when I was coming home was to go to the courts first and file a separation, because once I had those separation papers, I could legally get them to make him leave my house. And then the COVID pandemic hit. The courts were not going to be open. There's nothing I can do. It was literally like walking on eggshells, not knowing what to do and how to act. During this time, there was quite a few nights that I slept with my bedroom door locked. And I just absolutely dreaded the fact that I was gonna be stuck in the house with this person 24/7. I don't know what he would do if I finally do leave him. I was terrified. The Ray that I first met, I don't think it truly exists. I don't think any part but the manipulative, evil, mean, abusive person exists. I think it was all just lies and manipulation. I didn't want to let Ray know what I had planned because I didn't I didn't trust him, and I didn't know how he would react, and I was just trying to maintain and survive and play the role and continue to plan my escape. I decided I'm not gonna sit at home and deal with this. So I got a hold of some friends, and I went and hung out with some friends for the night. I wake up in the morning, and I call my mom on the way home. My mom tells me that I need to get home because he had killed my dog. And I don't even remember the drive home. I just remember getting there and just like, what the I don't need to take pictures, I'm just gonna video everything. So that is a video that I took the day that I came home, and it just shows just the pure destruction of my house and all my belongings, and you could see the dolls, my grandparents' dolls with their heads missing. And I mean, I knew he was a violent person, but I guess I didn't know the extremes and the level that his violence could get to. I didn't think he would literally go from one end of the house to the other and break everything in his path. God, and then my bedroom. That was where he murdered my poor dog. God, and that back wall, that was Shaggy splattered against that wall in my bed, and right where I laid my head every night to sleep. This is my dog, Shaggy. He was one of my best friends. He was just such a freakishly large Shih Tzu. He slept at the end of my bed, right at my foot of my bed, between me and the door, because he had to protect his mama. He was my furry soulmate. Ray murdered him. He took his poor little body and beat him against the bedroom walls and tied a scarf around his neck and hung him from a tree in my backyard. You can see the purple pieces of scarf. I felt like, sadly, Shaggy sacrificed himself that night to save me that night. Because if it wasn't gonna be Shaggy, it probably would have been me if I would have came home. I hate that, but it's how much he loved me and how much I loved him. My parents, when they were going through and cleaning the house and kind of trying to get it cleaned up, they found knives tucked around the house. Under the couch, under the living room coffee table, by the front door, just stashed everywhere. We later found a security camera that he had set up in the corner of the house. And on this security camera, you can see him assaulting my daughter. That night, I told my daughter to stay at her friend's house and to stay away from the house, but there was one point in the night that she needed her phone charger, so she went back down to the house. And he didn't want her in the house. Ray punched my daughter in the face and pushed her out the front door into a truck. I could tell by watching the video that he was waiting for me to come home, because he'd be sitting on the couch and you would see headlights come across the front windows, and he would get up and jump to the windows and look out the window and see what car it was. I fully believe that his plan that night was why he set the camera up was for me to come home, find my dog hanging from the tree, come into the house with no context, and him defend himself and kill me that night. At least that's what I think was his plan that night, because I don't know why else you would have knives tucked all around the house, in every corner of the house. When Ray got out of jail, he was living at his sister's house, and I had moved a new apartment with my kids. I had not told Ray where I had been living, but one day I got a text message from him with the picture of the front of my building. I think he was sending me a message that he could find me at any time if he wanted to. When I got his text message, I didn't, at that time, think very much of it. I had so much other things going on in my life. I didn't really take it as seriously as I probably should have at that time. Because looking back now, I feel like that was just the start of his plan to do something to me. It was a Sunday night. I was at home, and Ray had been sending me messages and trying to get me to come over to his sister's house. Ray sent me photos of signed divorce papers, and I thought that that was his way of telling me that we were done and this relationship was over. He was telling me that he was very sorry for everything that he had destroyed in my house, and he wanted to try to make some things right, and he had $1,000 to give to me. I told Ray that I would meet him, but I had some ground rules, that I was not getting out of the car, that I was going to bring my knife to protect me, and I was not staying very long to talk to him. Driving over there, I just all of a sudden got this sinking feeling of dread in my stomach, and I regret not turning around. He walks up to my driver's window and he hands me some money through the window. I think it was like $400 or so. Then he said he has the rest of the money, the rest of the $1,000 for me in the garage. And if I'd go in the garage with him, he'll give me the rest of the money. I walked into the garage and he walked in behind me, shut the door, immediately punched me in the side of my head, and said, "You really thought I was letting you go home tonight?" I mean, I immediately thought, what the did I just get myself into? I have my phone in my hand, and I have the knife tucked in my waistband, so I'm trying to get the knife out, and I just have this sinking feeling that this is not gonna turn into a very good situation. His eyes looked pure black. He just looked evil. Like this pure rage and hatred. I've seen him look mad before, but never like that.
Get back!
He starts strangling me from behind. And I can't breathe, and I don't know what to do, but I've still got the knife in my hand. So I look to my right, and the only thing I can see is his thigh. So I stabbed him in his thigh. And he pulled me out and he threw me down onto the ground and pinned me down and had my arms pinned down. Ray was telling me that he would stop strangling me if I gave him the knife. I'm not giving him that knife. So I took it and I threw it as hard as I could. But he didn't stop like he said he would. He continued to strangle me, and at that point, pretty sure I died for a moment because I wasn't there for I don't know how long, but where I was great. It was just the most euphoric place you have ever been, and the most calm and peaceful and just light and bright. And it's like, from those moments that I experienced, I'm not afraid to die anymore, if that makes any sense. But then I came back to, and he had all of my hair wrapped around his fist, and he was dragging me. And I remember thinking in that moment, I was like, I just want to go back to where I just was. Like, just take me back there. I don't want to be doing this right now. And then I realized I had to keep fighting. I'm screaming for somebody to help me. I'm screaming that he's trying to kill me, and he's telling me that nobody's gonna hear me and nobody is gonna come and help me, that I'm gonna die that night. And sitting on this toolbox is this big 8-inch metal C-clamp. And he grabs that and he hits me on the left side of my face right here a couple times with that. I could instantly feel the side of my face swell. I can hear all the sounds. I can hear myself struggling. I can hear myself gasping for my own breath. No one should ever have to hear something like that. I can hear myself begging for my own life. No one should ever have to hear that. But then he takes an electrical cord, cuts the end off of it, ties it into a noose, and starts chasing me around the garage with this electrical cord noose. And I know that I cannot let him get that around my neck. I know if he gets that around my neck, that I don't have my knife, I don't have anything, and what am I gonna do to fight an electrical cord? So I just keep running from him, and as I'm doing this, I'm looking up and I notice that there's already a noose hanging from the rafters. So I feel like he's gonna hang me and then hang himself. Like, what is going on? I know I'm in trouble and I just want to get out of there. Oh. Still shocks me. This is a picture of the C-clamp that I was beaten with. Yeah, I still just don't understand, like, why you would pick up something like that and hit somebody with it, and how it didn't do more damage to me. But yeah, this was fairly early into it when I got hit with this. 3.5 hours of not knowing whether I was gonna live or not. I was able to get away and out of the garage and get into my car and get it started, but the gear shift stuck. And by the time I tried to get it in the right gear, Ray was right there. He reached in and grabbed the keys. He forced me to get over in the passenger seat so he could drive and take off with me. So we leave there, and he's telling me that he just wants to go and talk to me, that he's not gonna hurt me anymore, that he just wants to go talk to me. After he took me from his sister's house, she called him and he answered, and he told her that he just wanted to go have a heart-to-heart talk with his wife one more time, but that he wasn't coming home and that he loved her.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Hi, I need an officer out to my place regarding my brother, Raymond Cervantes. I just walked out to my garage where he was. There's blood all over the floor. He is known, his ex-wife, he actually took her to a cemetery and told her to pick out her grave. He was in prison for that.
seriously, we ain't even close yet.
Right.
Like, we still gotta go all the way to the end of this cornfield. Can you imagine how terrified I was? The fishing spot that he took me is a desolate area that is a path between two cornfields. If you didn't know that this place existed, you wouldn't be able to find it. Like, I'm in the middle of nowhere. Already been beat, strangled multiple times, hit with a C-clamp. Told multiple times I'm never gonna see my kids or my dogs again. And then driven here. You could scream out there for hours and nobody would ever hear you. And we're still not even there. You can still see my tire tracks from the other night. I'm literally thinking that there's nobody out here that can help me. There's nobody that can hear me. And now we're by the water. What is he gonna do now? And then brought here. That is where I almost died. And then he picks up a piece of driftwood and starts beating me in the head. That's his shoe print. You can see this is right here. This is where I'm struggled. See it all. Everything. Every time he strangled me or was on top of me, it was don't quit moving. Nope, don't give up. If you quit moving and you give up, you're dead. And he keeps telling me, bitch, why won't you just pass out? Why won't you just pass out? And he wants me to look at him, and he keeps telling me to look at him, and I won't look at him, and it's like, look at me. I want to watch your eyes like I watched Shaggy's. I look down and I see where I stabbed him at. So I took my fingers and I just dug. It just kind of distracted him enough that I could break away from his chokehold. So I get away from him. And I get to the back of my car and I'm kind of leaning against it and I'm looking at my surroundings. And I remember just telling myself in my head to run. And my brain is screaming that, but my body's not listening. Physically, I have nothing left. I have been fighting for hours. I am exhausted. I am messed up. I knew that if he attacked me one more time, I wouldn't make it. This whole night, he just had this sense of rage about him. And for this moment, I didn't sense that. So I tried to reason with him. I told him, I said, look at the stars. I said, they're so pretty. So why don't we just look at the stars together? Told him that he had the money, we had my car, we could just run away together. And then I said, I think I'm dying. I said, I really need to go to the hospital. I said, can I please go to the hospital? And amazingly, he agreed. I was like, I will tell him I got in a car accident. And I said, I'm not going to tell him that this was you. I promise I'm not going to tell him it was you. And I got halfway between the car and the emergency room doors, and I turned and I looked at him, and I told him, I said, and if you think for a second I'm not telling them this was you, you're crazy. And I ran into the emergency room. This is a picture of me that night in the hospital. You can just see how misshapen my head is. My eyes are almost swollen shut. I think there were a few audible gasps when people saw me because it was just, I think, such a shocking thing to see. It reminds me how lucky I am to have made it through that night. It doesn't even look like me. It just doesn't even look like me. A person shouldn't look like that, especially from someone that was supposed to love them. That is Ray's mugshot. The night he tried to kill me. I don't like looking at this one. Oh, I don't like those eyes. That one gives me chills. Yeah. That captures the evilness of him, I think, perfectly. And just the look in his eyes, the look of hatred. He just looks mad and angry and evil. My life will never be the same after meeting him. I will live with lifelong consequences and medical issues because of the man in that picture. During the sentencing, the judge said about Ray that he's been doing this a lot of years and that he has seen a lot of things, but he now knows what the depths of an empty human soul looks like. There's still a chance that he can get out in my lifetime, and I don't think that he should ever be able to. I fully 100% believe that Ray is evil. I believe that he is an evil, soulless person. I would never feel safe if he was ever out on the streets again. I always believed in the best in people. Not anymore. I look at people and see the worst. I guess I have a little bit less faith in humanity after this, unfortunately. My life today is not what I imagined it would be. I don't like the memory problems. I don't like the stuttering. I'm still healing and still figuring out how to live with all of this stuff. I feel like I'm exposing myself for a lot of people to judge and look at me the wrong way and say the typical things that people say about domestic violence relationships. But I also know that it can help a lot of people and bring a lot of awareness. I always thought of myself as being independent and strong, and I would never take that from anybody, and then it happened. Still just take it day by day and still try to just survive, I guess. Going through something like that definitely empowers you and makes me feel stronger. I can face any situation. It may not be easy, and you may have to fight like hell, but you'll get through it.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. There's no remorse at all in that face. Randy looks like he was proud. Killing somebody, smiling about it? Only monsters would do that.
Hospitals are inherently places of extreme vulnerability and profound trust, where the fragility of human life is placed entirely in the hands of strangers clad in white uniforms. When we walk through the sliding glass doors of a medical facility, we implicitly surrender our autonomy, believing with absolute certainty that the individuals examining us, prescribing our medications, and monitoring our vital signs are bound by a sacred oath to do no harm. This unspoken social contract is magnified exponentially when the patient in question is an infant. A pediatric intensive care unit represents the most delicate intersection of hope and despair within any hospital system. In this sterile environment filled with the hum of monitors, the rhythmic hiss of ventilators, and the faint glow of displays measuring every heartbeat, parents stand completely powerless. They must rely exclusively on the expertise and the moral integrity of the medical professionals who watch over their critically ill children. The pediatric nurse, in particular, is viewed as a guardian, an ever-vigilant protector standing between a fragile new life and the abyss. But there is a terrifying subset of criminal psychology that shatters this foundational trust, a nightmare scenario where the guardian morphs into a predator and the sanctuary becomes a hunting ground. This phenomenon is known in the annals of true crime and forensic psychology as the angel of death. It is a chilling moniker for medical professionals who weaponize their access, their knowledge, and the inherent trust placed in them to extinguish the very lives they are sworn to protect. Among the most harrowing and historically significant examples of this medical malice is the case that unfolded between the years 1977 and 1982 in San Antonio, Texas. At the center of this grim chapter in medical history was a pediatric nurse named Janine Jones, a woman who had come to redefine the boundaries of institutional betrayal. To understand the magnitude of the horrors that occurred within the pediatric intensive care unit during her tenure, one must first explore the complex and deeply disturbed psychological framework that drove her actions. Unlike traditional perpetrators of violence who are motivated by financial gain, profound hatred, or deeply ingrained vendettas, Janine Jones operated under the influence of a severe manifestation of the hero complex. This pathological psychological condition revolves around a desperate, insatiable craving for attention, validation, and professional admiration. The perpetrator does not inherently desire the permanent destruction of their victim, but rather views the victim as a mere prop in an elaborate, high-stakes theatrical production where the perpetrator serves as the absolute center of the universe. In the sterile confines of the San Antonio hospital, Janine Jones craved the adrenaline rush and the ensuing accolades that came with emergency resuscitation. She sought the frantic energy of a medical crisis, the moment when alarms blare, doctors rush into the room, and the delicate balance between life and death hangs by a thread. To satiate this dark hunger, she engineered the emergencies herself. The methodology she employed was as calculated as it was devastating. Relying on her unimpeded access to the hospital pharmacy and the intimate, solitary moments she shared with the infants under her care, she purposefully introduced highly potent and lethal substances into their small, fragile systems. The primary weapons in her arsenal were drugs like succinylcholine and digoxin. Succinylcholine, a powerful paralytic typically used to induce muscle relaxation during intubation and surgery, and digoxin, a medication designed to treat heart failure and irregular heartbeats, are both substances that require incredibly precise administration even in adults. When introduced abruptly and without medical necessity into the bloodstream of an infant, the physical reaction is violently catastrophic. The infants subjected to her covert injections would suddenly and inexplicably spiral into severe medical distress. Their tiny bodies would be racked by violent seizures, or their hearts, overwhelmed by the sudden chemical influx, would plummet into sudden cardiac arrest. As the monitors screamed their warnings across the ward, the trap was sprung, and the orchestrator of the chaos would transform into the savior. Janine Jones would hurl herself into the frantic efforts to stabilize the crashing patient. She positioned herself at the forefront of the resuscitation attempts, appearing to her colleagues and to the deeply traumatized parents as an exceptionally skilled, dedicated, and hyper-vigilant nurse fighting relentlessly to pull the child back from the brink. The tragic reality was that this entire spectacle was a manufactured crisis designed solely to feed her ego. When she successfully helped stabilize an infant she had just poisoned, she absorbed the immense gratitude of the weeping parents and the professional respect of her unsuspecting peers. However, the margins of error when administering paralytics and cardiac medications to infants are infinitesimally small. Her desperate gamble for professional glorification routinely crossed the line from manufactured crisis into irreversible tragedy. The sheer volume of critical incidents occurring during her shifts began to paint a grim and undeniable statistical anomaly. Dozens upon dozens of infants experienced severe, life-threatening complications that defied medical logic based on their original diagnoses. The estimated death toll attributed to her actions in that San Antonio intensive care unit varies drastically due to the complexities of proving foul play in medically fragile patients long after the fact, but historical estimates suggest anywhere from 11 to 46 infants lost their lives as a direct result of her psychological compulsion. The sheer scale of the suffering inflicted upon these families is difficult to fathom, as parents mourn the sudden loss of their children, entirely unaware that the fatal blow was delivered by the hands of the woman who wept alongside them in the aftermath. Yet, the tragedy of Janine Jones extends far beyond the actions of one deeply disturbed individual. The narrative is heavily compounded by an institutional failure of catastrophic proportions, highlighting a systemic rot that prioritized self-preservation over the safety of the most vulnerable patients imaginable. As the mortality rates within the pediatric intensive care unit spiked to unprecedented and alarming levels, the administration at the county hospital in San Antonio could no longer ignore the dark cloud gathering over their facility. Data and basic observation clearly indicated that an unnatural phenomenon was occurring, and the common denominator in the vast majority of these sudden pediatric emergencies was the presence of Janine Jones. A moral and legal imperative dictated that the hospital leadership should immediately suspend her duties, secure the medical records, and initiate a full-scale investigation involving law enforcement and medical boards. Instead, faced with the terrifying prospect of a massive public relations nightmare, catastrophic civil litigation, and the total destruction of the hospital's reputation, the administration opted for a path of cowardly silence. They chose a catastrophic route of institutional self-protection by quietly orchestrating the departure of Janine Jones. Rather than reporting their profound suspicions of serial murder to the authorities, they facilitated her resignation and embarked on a quiet reorganization of the pediatric staff, effectively sweeping the rising body count under the rug. This profound betrayal by the hospital leadership provided the lethal nurse with a clean slate. Empowered by the lack of consequences and holding a medical license that remained entirely unblemished, Janine Jones simply moved her practice. The hospital's silent complicity allowed her to secure a new position at a pediatric clinic in the nearby town of Kerrville. The change of scenery did nothing to cure the deep-seated pathology of the hero complex. In Kerrville, far removed from the growing whispers of the San Antonio medical community, the tragic cycle immediately resumed. New families, bringing their children to a trusted community clinic for routine care, were unknowingly stepping into the crosshairs of an apex predator cloaked in medical scrubs. The consequences of the San Antonio hospital's decision to prioritize their public image over patient safety directly resulted in the continuation of a horrifying killing spree. The transition to Kerrville set the stage for further heartbreak, culminating in the poisoning of a young boy and the devastating death of an 11-month-old girl, the very crimes that would ultimately tear away her angelic facade and expose the absolute darkness underneath. The story of the San Antonio pediatric ward is a stark and terrifying examination of what happens when the safeguards designed to protect human life completely collapse. It forces a painful reckoning with the fragility of institutional oversight and the devastating consequences of administrative cowardice. This is not merely a recounting of a series of poisonings, but a deep exploration of a systematic failure that allowed a predator to roam freely through the most sensitive areas of the medical establishment. It is a narrative that demands we examine the dark corners of the human psyche, where the desire to be a hero eclipses the fundamental value of human life. The foundation has been laid, the environment of absolute trust has been established, and the predator has been allowed to slip quietly through the administrative cracks, moving toward her next unsuspecting victims in a quiet clinic, carrying with her a lethal compulsion that could not be stopped by anything less than absolute exposure. To understand the true gravity of the crimes committed between 1977 and 1982, we must first step away from the perpetrator and focus our gaze upon the environment where these atrocities occurred, and more importantly, upon the profound innocence of those who were lost. The county hospital in San Antonio during this era was a bustling epicenter of medical intervention, a place where the chaotic reality of human fragility collided with the relentless machinery of modern medicine. Within this sprawling complex, the pediatric intensive care unit existed as a world entirely unto itself. It was a realm defined by a sterile, unyielding brightness, where the harsh fluorescent lights never dimmed and the concept of day or night was entirely irrelevant. The air was perpetually thick with a sharp, astringent scent of clinical antiseptics, a constant olfactory reminder of the battle against infection. The auditory landscape of the ward was a relentless symphony of anxiety. There were the rhythmic, mechanical breaths of ventilators pushing life into lungs too weak to function independently, the steady, rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors tracking every precious heartbeat, and the sudden, terrifying shrill of alarms that signaled a sudden deterioration. For the medical staff, this sensory overload was the baseline of their daily existence, a high-stress environment that demanded absolute precision. But for the families who found themselves crossing the threshold of this unit, it was an alien and terrifying dimension. The parents who inhabited the waiting rooms and stood vigil beside the metal cribs were bound together by a shared, unspeakable terror. They were mothers and fathers who had suddenly been thrust into the most agonizing experience of their lives, watching their infants battle for survival. The victims in this tragic narrative were not capable of understanding their surroundings, nor could they articulate their pain or point an accusing finger at their tormentor. They were fragile infants, representing the absolute zenith of human vulnerability. They were entirely dependent on the towering figures in white uniforms who hovered over them. A pediatric patient in an intensive care unit is essentially a fragile vessel, their vital signs precariously balanced on a razor edge. A minor shift in blood chemistry can dictate the difference between life and death. The parents understood this delicate balance, and because they were powerless, they transferred all of their hope onto the nursing staff. They looked at the nurses not merely as medical professionals, but as vigilant guardians, surrogate protectors who would maintain a tireless watch while the exhausted parents snatched a few moments of sleep in hard plastic chairs. This profound, unconditional trust is what makes the presence of a predator in such an environment so fundamentally incomprehensible. The betrayal of this trust was orchestrated with horrifying calculation. The infants targeted were often those who were finally showing signs of stability, those whose parents had just begun to allow themselves the dangerous luxury of hope. To fully grasp the sheer cruelty of the methodology employed, one must examine the specific medical tools weaponized within the quiet corners of the intensive care unit. The prompt details the use of succinylcholine and digoxin, two drastically different but equally devastating chemical agents when introduced maliciously into an infant bloodstream. Digoxin is a complex medication utilized in cardiology to increase the force of myocardial contraction and to slow the heart rate in patients with specific arrhythmias. In a tightly controlled, meticulously calculated pediatric dosage, it is a lifesaver. But when injected arbitrarily in massive doses, it rapidly becomes a lethal, chaotic poison. It rapidly overwhelms the delicate electrical pathways of the infant heart. The resulting toxicity causes profound nausea, chaotic and irregular heart rhythms, and ultimately, absolute cardiac collapse. The infant heart, bombarded by the inappropriate chemical signal, simply short-circuits, sending the monitors into a frenzied scream and plunging the room into absolute chaos. Succinylcholine, conversely, operates on an entirely different but equally terrifying physiological principle. It is a powerful, fast-acting depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agent. In legitimate medical practice, it is administered to rapidly paralyze a patient muscles to facilitate the insertion of an endotracheal tube. The drug works by binding to receptors in the muscles, causing total, flaccid paralysis. When administered maliciously to a conscious, unmedicated infant, the effects are nothing short of absolute torture. The child would maintain full cognitive awareness, able to see, hear, and feel the world around them, but they would instantly lose all voluntary muscle control. The most devastating consequence of this paralysis is the immediate inability to breathe. The diaphragm, the primary muscle of respiration, simply stops functioning. The infant, wide awake, would suddenly find themselves trapped in a paralyzed body, rapidly suffocating, entirely unable to cry out. The oxygen levels in their blood would plummet, their lips and skin would turn a terrifying shade of cyanotic blue, and they would slide rapidly toward an agonizing death unless immediate, aggressive intervention was provided. This was the horrific, invisible violence inflicted upon the most helpless patients in the hospital, a silent chemical assault that left no immediate physical bruises, but wrought absolute internal devastation. The environment of the county hospital in San Antonio unwittingly provided the perfect camouflage for this specific breed of serial predator. In an intensive care unit where infants are already critically ill, a sudden deterioration is always a statistical possibility, however tragic. When a baby crashed, The immediate assumption of the medical team was that the child's underlying condition had worsened, not that they had been deliberately poisoned by a colleague. The subsequent frantic rush to resuscitate, the very chaos the perpetrator desperately craved, further obscured the truth. In the frantic moments of administering life-saving drugs and forcing oxygen into failing lungs, the initial, fatal injection was lost in the noise. The sheer volume of victims, estimated to be between 11 and 46 infants, speaks volumes. Each death was a localized tragedy, mourned deeply by a shattered family and seemingly rationalized by a medical system that failed to connect the dots. The hospital administration eventual realization of a statistical anomaly, their suspicion regarding the unnatural spike in mortality during specific shifts, and their subsequent, catastrophic decision to quietly force a resignation rather than involve law enforcement, represents a secondary, institutional violence inflicted upon every family who lost a child. The narrative of tragedy, however, did not conclude within the concrete walls of the San Antonio hospital. The administrative cover-up facilitated a geographical shift, allowing the dark shadow of the hero complex to migrate from the sprawling, chaotic environment of a major urban medical center to the seemingly tranquil setting of a pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas. The contrast between these two environments is stark, and it highlights the relentless, adaptable nature of the psychological compulsion driving the perpetrator. A community pediatric clinic is traditionally a place of routine and reassurance. It is where parents bring their toddlers for vaccinations, where fevers are diagnosed, and where the mundane ailments of childhood are treated with gentle care. Parents walking into the Kerrville clinic were entirely relaxed, their guard completely down. They were bringing their children to a trusted community resource, seeking preventative care, absolutely unaware that the woman weighing their babies carried a history of death in her wake. The transition to Kerrville brings into sharp focus the specific tragedies of the two victims explicitly mentioned in the historical data, the 11-month-old girl and the young boy. The 11-month-old girl represents a particularly heartbreaking stage of infancy. At 11 months, a child is on the absolute precipice of toddlerhood. They are no longer the fragile, sleeping newborns of the intensive care unit. They are vibrant, emerging personalities. They are learning to pull themselves up on furniture, they are babbling their first attempts at language, and they are forming deep, recognizable attachments to their parents. For a child at this vibrant stage of life to be brought into a routine clinical setting, only to be covertly injected with a lethal substance, is an act of unimaginable malice. Her death was not just the cessation of a heartbeat, it was the theft of an entire lifetime of milestones. The parents of the 11-month-old girl walked into the clinic with a child looking toward the future and were thrust into an unfathomable nightmare, their daughter life extinguished by a calculated act of manufactured crisis that went horribly wrong. Similarly, the poisoning of the young boy in the same Kerrville clinic further underscores the indiscriminate nature of the threat. His inclusion in this dark chapter serves as a stark reminder of the sheer luck and arbitrary chance that often dictated survival in the presence of this medical predator. He too was subjected to the terrifying physiological chaos of unauthorized chemical intervention. His small body was forced to endure a violent, artificial medical crisis, engineered solely to satisfy a twisted psychological need for professional drama and subsequent adulation. His survival stands as a testament to the lethal roulette played with the lives of patients. The portraits of the victims serve as the emotional anchor of this narrative. They are the stark, silent reminders of the catastrophic cost of the hero complex, a devastating psychological aberration that transformed the sanctity of pediatric medicine into a horrifying theater of death, leaving shattered families forever. The echoes of their loss continue to resonate through the decades, demanding that we never forget the profound vulnerability of those who are entrusted to a broken system. Their memories stand as a solemn demand for absolute vigilance and accountability in the entire medical establishment. The transition from the clinical setting of the San Antonio hospital to the seemingly serene environment of the Kerrville clinic did not represent a departure from the lethal pattern, but rather a dangerous escalation fueled by a sense of impunity. By the time Janine Jones began her tenure in Kerrville, the internal dynamics of her pathology had fully matured. She was no longer operating within the high-acuity, chaotic framework of an intensive care unit where the sudden decline of a patient could be plausibly attributed to their existing, life-threatening pathologies. In the slower, more predictable atmosphere of a community clinic, the sudden collapse of a healthy or stable child became an event that demanded an immediate, focused explanation. Yet, even as the stakes rose, her compulsion to engineer these crises remained unshakable. The methodology remained consistent: the covert administration of potent, medically unnecessary substances, followed by her immediate, heroic attempt at resuscitation. The tragedy in Kerrville highlights the absolute, chilling confidence she had developed, a confidence born from the knowledge that the medical establishment had already shielded her once. She operated with the terrifying assumption that even if suspicions were raised, the institutional machinery would prioritize the reputation of the clinic over the safety of the children. The incident involving the 11-month-old girl stands as a focal point of this era. At this age, the infant is uniquely vulnerable, yet visibly alive with potential. The mother who brought her child into the clinic that day would have expected nothing more than standard, routine care. The clinical space, meant to be a place of healing, became the stage for a calculated act of violence. When the child began to experience the rapid, terrifying physiological effects of the administered poison, the transformation of the clinic environment would have been instantaneous. The quiet, orderly nature of a community pediatric office would have dissolved into a scene of frantic, high-stakes panic. In that moment of manufactured catastrophe, the child was fighting a silent battle against a chemical agent that was systemically shutting down her vital functions, while her killer stood over her, providing the very intervention that was supposed to save her. This act was not an error in judgment or a mistake in dosage. It was a deliberate deployment of power. By controlling the child's proximity to death, Jones was attempting to control the perception of her own capabilities. She needed to be seen as the ultimate savior, the one who could pluck a child from the very jaws of demise. However, as the incidents continued to mount in Kerrville, the veneer of the dedicated nurse began to wear thin. The statistical anomaly that had been observed in San Antonio began to reappear. Pediatric clinicians and observers in Kerrville began to notice the same alarming trend. Children who were brought in for minor or routine issues were suddenly experiencing unexplained, severe, and life-threatening emergencies exclusively when they were in the care of Janine Jones. The accumulation of these events moved beyond the realm of medical mystery and into the sphere of undeniable pattern. Each incident was a data point in a growing, invisible map of destruction. The parents, shattered by the sudden decline of their children, began to demand answers. Their grief was accompanied by a growing, intuitive suspicion that what they had witnessed in the clinic room was not a natural medical misfortune. The voices of these families began to pierce through the institutional silence that had protected Jones for so long. The realization started to dawn on those around her that they were not witnessing a series of medical miracles, but a series of deliberate, orchestrated assaults. The investigation into the events in Kerrville became a race against time, as the authorities began to piece together the timeline of her employment and the corresponding reports of infant illness and death. The shift from denial to discovery was slow, painful, and fraught with resistance from those who had previously enabled her. Every medical record, every shift log, and every witness statement had to be scrutinized to separate the reality of the patient's health from the manufactured crisis imposed by the nurse. The psychological profile of the perpetrator during this period of investigation is particularly chilling. She maintained an unwavering, calm exterior, presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, a maligned professional whose only desire was to save lives. This dissociation between her public persona and the reality of the evidence created a profound friction within the community and the legal system. As the authorities deepened their inquiry, they uncovered the extent to which the drugs, specifically succinylcholine and digoxin, had been misappropriated. The supply chains within the clinic were subjected to forensic accounting, revealing unauthorized access and unexplained shortages that directly correlated with the timelines of the infant crises. The weight of the evidence was beginning to tilt, shifting the narrative from a series of tragic, unexplained accidents to a coherent, sustained campaign of serial murder. The medical experts brought in to review the cases were struck by the impossibility of the clinical presentations. Infants do not simply stop breathing or go into acute cardiac arrest without a clear, underlying physiological trigger. When those triggers were systematically absent, the only remaining explanation was the introduction of an external chemical agent. The legal strategy during this phase was meticulous. Prosecutors had to navigate the complexities of proving intent, which required not just the presence of the drugs, but the demonstration that the perpetrator had a clear motive and the exclusive opportunity to administer them. The stories of the families, once suppressed or dismissed as overly emotional or mistaken, now became the core testimony that anchored the prosecution's case. Their testimony provided the human dimension to the clinical data, detailing the moments before the collapse, the look in the nurse's eyes as she saved their child, and the crushing despair that followed. The investigation also had to confront the systemic issues that had allowed this to occur. It was not enough to simply identify the killer. It was necessary to expose the failure of the medical institutions to protect their patients. The depositions from hospital administrators and clinic staff revealed a culture of avoidance, where the discomfort of addressing a potential serial killer within their ranks was deemed more disruptive than the loss of the infants themselves. This institutional failure is a crucial component of the case, as it speaks to the broader vulnerability of patients in a system that values hierarchy and reputation over transparency. The pursuit of justice for these families required breaking through layers of professional obfuscation. As the evidence solidified, the path to the courtroom was cleared, and the legal battle that would define the rest of Janine Jones's life began to take shape. The investigation did not just seek to establish her guilt. It sought to restore the truth of these lost lives, ensuring that their deaths were not dismissed as the casualties of a high-risk medical profession, but acknowledged as the deliberate, cold-blooded murders that they were. The evidence was overwhelming, and as the case against her prepared for trial, the mask of the angel was finally and permanently shattered, leaving the reality of a predator exposed to the full, uncompromising glare of the law. The victims, whose voices had been silenced by the drugs and the chaos of the clinic, were finally finding their advocates in the courtroom, ensuring that the history of these events would be recorded not as a series of fortunate rescues, but as a long, dark shadow of institutional and individual betrayal. The investigation, in its final stages, had become a testament to the resilience of the families who refused to be silenced, and to the detectives and prosecutors who painstakingly pieced together the fragments of a shattered reality to hold a predator accountable for a trail of death that spanned years and multiple medical settings. The resolution of this inquiry was not just a legal necessity, but a moral imperative, a way to close the door on a nightmare that had plagued two communities and stolen the future from dozens of infants who were never given the chance to grow. The procedural gears of the judicial system, once set into motion, moved with a deliberate, crushing weight that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic and impulsive violence of the crimes themselves. The investigation phase, which had meticulously untangled the web of clinical anomalies and institutional negligence, now transitioned into the preparation for a criminal prosecution that would challenge the limits of forensic medicine and the definition of premeditated malice. Prosecutors in Texas faced a formidable task. They were not merely proving that a death had occurred, but they were tasked with the forensic impossible, tracing a silent, chemical death back to a specific pair of hands within a busy medical environment. The legal team focused their efforts on constructing a narrative of intent, pulling from the mounting mountain of records that illustrated a consistent, recurring correlation between the presence of Janine Jones and the catastrophic decline of previously stable infants. This part of the case was not about the absence of care, but the presence of deliberate, calculated harm. Every chart, every dosage record, and every witness account was scrutinized under the lens of forensic toxicology, a process that transformed the clinical records of the county hospital and the Kerrville Clinic into the primary evidence of a serial offender. The pretrial phase was characterized by a series of intense legal battles regarding the admissibility of prior bad acts and the relevance of the statistical data. The defense, attempting to frame the deaths as tragic but ultimately random medical failures, struggled against the overwhelming accumulation of circumstantial evidence. The The prosecutors, however, were bolstered by the testimonies of medical experts who analyzed the physiology of the infant's collapses. These experts explained, in stark, clinical detail, the mechanics of succinylcholine and digoxin when administered to an infant. They testified to the impossibility of these drugs entering an infant's system via any route other than direct, intravenous, or intramuscular injection, effectively dismantling any argument of accidental exposure or error. The investigators had successfully transitioned from being investigators of accidents to being trackers of a predator. They had to reconcile the testimonies of parents, who described the horrific, sudden transitions from normalcy to crisis, with the clinical documentation that Jones herself had dutifully recorded as a dedicated nurse. The disparity between her detailed, professional logs and the reality of the toxicological results became a damning indictment of her character. As the case moved toward the trial, the courtroom became an arena where the cold, hard science of forensics met the raw, searing grief of the families. The families, who for years had been told that their children's deaths were simply unfortunate realities of the medical field, now stood at the center of a process that promised to validate their suspicions and provide a measure of justice. The prosecution team ensured that the human element remained paramount. They were careful to structure the case not just around the technicalities of the drugs used, but around the reality of the lives that had been extinguished. The legal strategy involved a methodical presentation of the cases, building a cumulative argument that the frequency of these emergencies was statistically impossible under any other condition than a deliberate, repeated act of poison. Each case was presented with a precision that was intended to leave no doubt in the minds of the jury. This was not a series of unfortunate events, but a series of calculated, serial acts of homicide. The defense's inability to explain the persistent correlation between Jones and these medical crises left them cornered. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the testimony, as experts described the terrifying agony of the children who were subjected to these chemicals. The detail provided in court transformed the dry, clinical language of the autopsy reports into a living, breathing reality of suffering. The prosecution carefully navigated the legal requirements of proving first-degree murder, a standard that demanded evidence of premeditation and intent. By demonstrating that Jones deliberately accessed the specific, controlled medications, prepared the dosages, and waited for the opportune moment to strike, they successfully argued that her actions were the result of a cold, calculated plan. This was the core of the case, the intentionality behind the heroism. The jury was forced to confront the reality that the woman they were judging had purposefully created a life-threatening crisis solely to provide herself with the opportunity to perform a rescue. The testimony of former colleagues, who had initially been reluctant to speak out, provided a crucial layer of evidence, detailing the shifts in her behavior, her strange, manic energy during emergencies, and the unsettling pride she seemed to derive from the chaos of a dying child. These testimonies, though given years after the events, were pivotal. They stripped away the professional mask that Jones had worn and revealed the internal reality of a woman who was more concerned with her own status as a nurse than with the survival of the patients in her care. The forensic evidence, specifically the evidence gathered from the vials and the documentation of missing drugs, provided the physical link that the prosecution needed to finalize their argument. The logistical challenge of presenting these findings in a clear, compelling manner was immense, but the prosecution relied on clear visualizations and expert narratives to ensure that the jury could follow the complex web of evidence. The defense tried to cast doubt on the forensic findings, suggesting that the medical practices of the time were inherently flawed, but their arguments were repeatedly undermined by the sheer consistency of the results in the cases associated with Jones. The trial was not just a judgment on one person, but a trial of the institutional culture that had allowed her to operate for so long. The systemic failures of the San Antonio Hospital and the Kerrville Clinic were on full display, as the evidence revealed how easily a predator could exploit the gaps in oversight and the institutional desire to avoid public scrutiny. The prosecutors were relentless in their questioning, forcing institutional representatives to confront their decisions and the consequences of their silence. This aspect of the case added a layer of profound social importance, transforming the trial into a catalyst for changes in hospital policies, surveillance, and reporting requirements. The trial became a landmark in the history of medical malpractice and criminal justice, setting a precedent for how medical facilities should respond to suspicions of criminal activity within their ranks. Throughout the process, the emotional resilience of the families was the defining force. Their commitment to seeking the truth, despite the years of denial and gaslighting they had endured, was the engine that powered the prosecution. The courtroom, often filled with the presence of those who had lost their children, became a place of reckoning. The defense's attempts to discredit these families were met with firm, compassionate, and evidence-based rebuttals from the prosecution. The legal team treated each family with the dignity they deserved, ensuring that their accounts of the events were presented not as emotional outbursts, but as factual descriptions of a reality that the medical system had failed to address. The combination of forensic rigor, expert testimony, and the harrowing, first-hand accounts from the families created an insurmountable wall of evidence. The trial concluded with the presentation of the final, damning pieces of evidence, leaving the jury with a clear, undeniable picture of the actions taken by Janine Jones. The proceedings had been a long, arduous journey toward justice, but the clarity of the conclusion was unmistakable, leaving no room for ambiguity or doubt about the nature of the crimes that had occurred in the quiet, sterile rooms of 2 Texas medical facilities. The narrative of the trial, from the initial investigation to the final, crushing presentation of the facts, stood as a definitive record of a series of crimes that had for too long remained hidden behind a mask of professional dedication. The culmination of the trial, a process that had stripped away the layers of institutional denial and professional deception, arrived with a finality that resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The verdict was not merely a mechanical application of legal statutes, but a moral adjudication of the betrayal of the most sacred trust in human civilization, the protection of the innocent. When the jury returned with the verdict of guilty, it signaled the end of a long, arduous struggle for those families whose grief had been silenced and misdirected by the very institutions that were supposed to provide comfort. In 1985, the sentencing phase placed a period at the end of the first chapter of this grim history. Jones was sentenced to 99 years in prison for the murder of an 11-month-old girl and the poisoning of another infant. The courtroom, which had served as the stage for the meticulous reconstruction of her crimes, felt a profound shift as the gravity of the sentence settled over the room. For the families, the verdict was a validation of their years of suspicion, a declaration that their children's lives had not been surrendered to a tragic medical mystery, but to a calculated, serial predator. The sentencing, however, was framed within the constraints of the legal climate of the time, specifically the archaic Texas laws concerning prisoner population management. These laws, which aimed to address the severe overcrowding in the state's correctional facilities, unfortunately allowed for the possibility of early release or parole, a reality that the families and prosecutors had to confront with a mix of dread and resolve. The 99-year sentence, while substantial on its face, was never intended to be a guarantee of permanent incarceration. As the decades passed, the lingering shadow of Janine Jones's potential release remained a source of profound anxiety for those who had survived her and the families who had lost their children. The legal system, having finally established her guilt, was now caught in a precarious balance between the punitive requirements of justice and the administrative pressures of the state's prison system. This tension underscored the ongoing, systemic vulnerability that the families continued to navigate as they were forced to remain vigilant, participating in parole hearings and advocating for the continued incarceration of a woman who had never expressed genuine remorse. The legal battle for true justice, therefore, did not end with the gavel strike in 1985. It was a prolonged, multi-decadal effort to ensure that the initial judgment was not eroded by bureaucratic technicalities or changing prison policies. The prosecutors who had led the original case, along with the families of the victims, remained committed to the idea that the threat posed by Jones was not a historical artifact but an enduring danger that required permanent containment. This commitment was tested as the years progressed, particularly as the date for her potential mandatory release under the old, flawed sentencing guidelines approached. The prospect of her freedom in 2018 became a rallying point for the legal and investigative community, who understood that releasing such an individual would be a catastrophic failure of the justice system. The resolve to prevent her release necessitated a bold and unprecedented legal strategy: the reopening of long-dormant files to seek additional indictments for the deaths of other infants who had been targeted during her time at the hospital. The decision to initiate these new charges in 2017 was a strategic maneuver designed to ensure that the legal system could rectify the shortcomings of the initial proceedings. By bringing forward new evidence and fresh indictments related to the deaths of 5 other infants, the prosecutors were not only highlighting the true scale of her killing spree, but also creating a secondary, insurmountable legal obstacle to her potential parole. The courtroom once again became the epicenter of a historic confrontation, as the evidence of these additional crimes, many of which had been overlooked or improperly documented in the frantic, fearful days of the initial investigation, was brought to light. The process of preparing these new cases required a monumental effort to review decades-old medical records, locate aging witnesses, and re-examine the forensic data with modern, advanced analytical tools. This effort was a testament to the persistence of the investigators, who refused to let the passage of time grant the predator a reprieve from accountability. The proceedings in the years leading up to 2020 were characterized by the same rigor that had defined the initial trial, but with the added weight of history and the clear determination to secure a final, absolute resolution. The prosecutors navigated the procedural challenges of bringing decades-old cases to trial, ensuring that the evidence was not only admissible but compellingly presented. They argued that the new charges were essential to providing a full and accurate account of the devastation caused by Jones, and that the nature of her crimes, premeditated serial murder of the most vulnerable, precluded the possibility of rehabilitation or safe release. The legal arguments were bolstered by the continued testimony of the families, whose presence remained a powerful, persistent reminder of the human cost of her actions. As the case moved toward the final judgment, it became clear that the state of Texas was determined to correct the mistakes of the past, ensuring that the shadow cast by the angel of death would finally be extinguished within the confines of the prison walls. In early 2020, the long, convoluted struggle for justice reached its definitive conclusion. Jones was convicted of the additional charges, and the court delivered a new, unequivocal sentence: life in prison. This sentence, when added to the existing weight of the law, effectively eliminated any remaining, tenuous possibility of her ever breathing free air again. The conclusion was a profound, cathartic moment for all those involved: the prosecutors, the investigators, and most importantly, the families who had been waiting for over 40 years for this absolute confirmation of justice. The sentencing was the final, critical step in the arc of the case, ensuring that the legal system had fully fulfilled its duty to the victims. The life sentence represented not just the conclusion of a trial, but the final, decisive action of a system that had once faltered, but had eventually found its way to a proper, righteous resolution. It was a victory for the principle of accountability, a signal that no matter how much time had passed, the gravity of such crimes would always be met with the full, unyielding force of the law. The courtroom, as it settled into the silence following the final pronouncement, felt as though a great, dark burden had finally been lifted from the community. The narrative of the trial, from the initial conviction to the final, permanent sentencing, was a complete and coherent record of a struggle for truth. It was a journey that had required immense fortitude and a deep, enduring commitment to the victims, whose names and memories were finally honored by a judgment that matched the severity of their loss. The finality of the 2020 sentence stands as the definitive, legal record of the case of Janine Jones, a case that has come to define the challenges of investigating and prosecuting serial medical predators within complex, institutional environments. The legal system, through its persistence and eventual success, restored a measure of order and provided a definitive, lasting answer to the questions that had haunted the community for decades. The case is now closed, not just in the records of the court, but in the collective memory, serving as a permanent, cautionary history of the consequences of institutional failure and the power of the pursuit of justice, regardless of how long and arduous that path may be. The final, life-altering outcome for the perpetrator was the only outcome that could truly be considered a fulfillment of justice, as it ensured that the cycle of violence, which had begun so many years ago in a hospital ward in San Antonio, would finally be brought to a permanent, irreversible end, thereby securing a sense of peace for those who had been forever marked by the actions of the one who had sworn, but ultimately and horrifically failed, to do no harm. The legacy of Janine Jones is not merely a chronicle of clinical cruelty. It is a profound, searing indictment of institutional fragility and the catastrophic consequences of silence. To reflect upon the final chapter of this narrative is to confront the uncomfortable reality that systems designed to preserve life can, when confronted with the prospect of reputational ruin, inadvertently become facilitators of death. The story of the pediatric intensive care unit in San Antonio and the clinic in Kerrville is not just a study of an individual's psychopathology, but a mirror reflecting the inherent vulnerabilities of hospitals that prioritize order and image over the uncomfortable, often devastating, truth of internal danger. When the administrators at the county hospital first sensed the statistical impossibility of the mortality spikes, they stood at a crossroads. The choice to protect the hospital's prestige by quietly forcing a resignation, rather than reporting the suspicion to the authorities, was a moral failure of the highest magnitude. It was an act of institutional cowardice that effectively weaponized the perpetrator, granting her the freedom to continue her cycle of violence in another setting. The victims who suffered in Kerrville are, in a very real sense, the casualties of that initial, disastrous administrative decision. This realization forces us to examine the nature of professional trust and the structures that are meant to oversee the conduct of medical personnel. The concept of the angel of death is not a myth but a terrifying, periodic reality that emerges from the intersection of a predator's unchecked compulsion and an institution's inability, or unwillingness, to act. When a nurse, a role synonymous with compassion and care, becomes an agent of harm, the psychological impact on the families is magnified exponentially. These parents did not just lose a child, they lost their faith in the most fundamental safety net of society. The trauma of realizing that the person who held their baby in their final moments was the one who engineered that finality is a weight that cannot be measured or easily healed. The long, arduous pursuit of justice for these families was not about revenge. It was about the necessity of witnessing and acknowledging the truth. For 40 years, these families carried the burden of being told their children's deaths were natural or coincidental. The final, life-altering legal outcomes for Janine Jones were essential not only for public safety, but as a necessary step in the long, painful process of validation for the survivors. The narrative of Janine Jones also serves as a critical, enduring lesson on the importance of transparency and accountability in the medical establishment. It highlights the dangers of insular professional cultures where internal problems are treated as embarrassments to be hidden rather than crises to be managed. The evolution of the legal approach, from the initial, limited conviction to the eventual, exhaustive prosecution that secured a life sentence, reflects a significant maturation in how justice systems handle serial medical crimes. It demonstrates the necessity of moving beyond the immediate, often narrow scope of a single case to understand the broader pattern of behavior. The forensic advancements that allowed for the successful prosecution of the additional cases in 2017 are evidence of the evolving ability of the justice system to hold individuals accountable for patterns of harm that span decades. This evolution is perhaps the most significant, tangible legacy of the case, suggesting that the systems which once allowed for such a predator to move unseen are now better equipped to recognize, investigate, and neutralize the threat. Yet, as we reflect on the final resolution, we must also address the lingering, haunting questions about the human psyche and the darkness that can exist within the most angelic of professions. The hero complex, the engine of Jones's violence, is a chilling reminder of how a warped desire for validation can override the basic human instinct for preservation. It is a psychological aberration that transforms the savior's mask into a veil for a predator, making the victim a mere instrument in a performance of self-glorification. We're left to wonder what warning signs might have been visible earlier, what internal or external failures allowed such a pathological hunger to fester unchecked, and how many other individuals might be operating under similar delusions of grandeur within the healthcare system. The case of Janine Jones compels a broader, ongoing conversation about the selection, training, and ongoing oversight of medical professionals. It demands that we foster cultures of transparency, where concerns about patient safety are voiced without fear of institutional retribution. The true weight of this history is held in the memories of the families and the profound, permanent absence of the children who were lost. Their lives, though cut short by an act of incomprehensible malice, continue to be the primary focus of this narrative. Every legal victory, every sentence, and every reflection upon the case is, at its heart, an effort to ensure that their stories are told with dignity and that their loss is understood as a fundamental, unmitigated tragedy. The legal system's final decision, ensuring that Janine Jones will spend the remainder of her life behind bars, is a conclusion that restores a semblance of order, but it cannot undo the past. The echoes of these events remain, a permanent reminder of the fragility of the life-care bond. We look to these lessons not to live in fear, but to advocate for a future where such a catastrophe of oversight and cruelty becomes impossible. The case of the nurse in San Antonio and Kerrville remains a touchstone for truth-seeking and institutional reform, a story that demands we remain eternally vigilant. Reflecting on the totality of the saga, one is struck by the persistence of the human spirit, the families who refuse to be discouraged by years of gaslighting and systemic indifference, and the investigators who persisted in their search for the truth long after the trail had gone cold. Their commitment is the beacon of hope in this otherwise dark account. The history of Janine Jones serves as a somber guide for the present, a reminder that transparency is the most potent disinfectant against institutional rot. The finality of the legal resolution is a testament to the fact that justice, however delayed or obstructed, remains an absolute imperative of a civilized society. As we close this chapter, the focus must remain on the enduring impact of these events on the lives of those who were touched by the tragedy. The memory of the victims, the courage of the survivors, and the hard-won justice secured by the state of Texas together form the final, lasting record of a case that has redefined our understanding of medical accountability. The narrative ends here, not with a sense of triumph, but with a deep, solemn respect for the truth, ensuring that the legacy of this case will continue to educate and serve as a warning for generations to come. The shadow of the angel of death has been permanently dispelled by the light of the law, and the victims finally rest in the clarity of the truth that was denied to them for so long. The systemic failures have been exposed and addressed, and the person who violated the most sacred trust has been removed from the society she so profoundly betrayed. This is the conclusion of the case, a complete, exhaustive, and ultimately moral accounting of one of the most significant and heartbreaking series of crimes in modern medical history, leaving us to contemplate the delicate, precarious nature of the care we entrust to others and the enduring power of those who speak out to ensure that justice, however long it takes, is finally served in full. The conclusion of this harrowing saga extends beyond the sterile confines of the courtroom and the heavy iron doors of the state penitentiary. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality of what occurs when the protective layers of institutional oversight are eroded by the corrosive forces of institutional self-interest. To look back at the timeline of the Janine Jones case, from the 1970s in San Antonio to the legal finality achieved in 2020, is to witness a profound, multi-generational failure of the mechanisms designed to shield the vulnerable. The story does not merely end with the incarceration of a serial predator. It leaves behind a mandate for a fundamental shift in the culture of healthcare. We must move toward an era where the culture of silence, that dangerous, unspoken agreement to prioritize the institution's reputation over the fundamental duty to patient safety, is completely dismantled. The tragedy of the infants whose lives were stolen serves as a permanent, agonizing reminder that when medical institutions become silos of secrecy, the most vulnerable patients pay the ultimate price. This realization must continue to drive the evolution of hospital governance, ensuring that the reporting of suspicious clinical events is not just a policy, but but a deeply ingrained ethical imperative that supersedes any fear of litigation or public embarrassment. The legacy of these events is reflected in the modern, rigorous standards of internal audit and external oversight that now define the best practices in pediatric intensive care across the globe. We must also consider the ongoing, quiet resilience of the families. Their journey was not simply a pursuit of a guilty verdict, but an arduous, decades-long quest to restore the truth of their children's lives. For years, they were forced to endure the agonizing uncertainty of being told their children were simply the unfortunate victims of complex, fatal conditions, a narrative that effectively gaslit them into questioning their own maternal and paternal instincts. The courage required to persist, to challenge the medical establishment, and to finally push for the reopening of dormant files stands as the most inspiring element of this otherwise bleak history. These families became the unintended experts on their own tragedy, meticulously piecing together the timeline of their children's final days, and their unwavering determination is the primary reason that Janine Jones will spend the remainder of her days in confinement. The legal victories, particularly the landmark sentencing in 2020, are a direct result of their refusal to be silenced, their tenacity in the face of institutional pushback, and their profound commitment to ensuring that the names of their children remain at the center of the narrative. This is a powerful lesson in the impact of civic engagement and the vital role that victims' families play in the broader pursuit of justice. The psychological profile of the perpetrator, specifically the manifestation of the hero complex within a medical context, remains a subject of intense study for forensic psychologists. It challenges our understanding of altruism and the potential for the appearance of caring to mask a deeply narcissistic and predatory core. Janine Jones utilized the machinery of the hospital to create a stage where she was the undisputed lead, the savior who appeared at the critical moment of collapse, the one whose actions were lauded by peers and parents alike. This subversion of the caregiver role is what makes the crime so uniquely traumatic. When we entrust our children to a nurse, we are not just paying for medical administration, we are offering up our vulnerability in exchange for the promise of empathy and protection. When that bond is weaponized, the violation is total. The study of this case provides essential insights into the necessity of monitoring for heroism, to look for the caregiver who is disproportionately present during adverse events, for the individual who seems to thrive on the chaos of resuscitation rather than its successful outcome. These are the subtle, early markers that can signal a pattern of behavior before it escalates into a series of lethal events. The case of Janine Jones has, in essence, provided a template for what to look for, a diagnostic tool for identifying the potential for medical malice within the healthcare workforce. The historical significance of this case also lies in its role as a turning point for the legal system in Texas. The prosecutors who worked the long, winding path to the final sentencing, overcoming the immense hurdles of the statute of limitations, the disappearance of evidence, and the reluctance of witnesses, set a new standard for cold case investigations involving medical serial crime. Their success demonstrates that the pursuit of justice is not bound by the passage of time, nor by the complexity of the medical records, provided there is a persistent, focused, and evidence-based approach. The legal team's ability to weave together disparate accounts from different decades into a coherent, incontrovertible narrative of serial homicide was a forensic feat. It paved the way for future investigations, proving that with enough dedication and the right forensic resources, the truth can be excavated from even the most deeply buried files. This legacy of successful, long-term prosecution is a beacon for other investigators dealing with similar, historically complex cases, offering a roadmap for how to hold perpetrators accountable even when the initial investigation has failed or been suppressed. As we bring this detailed examination to a close, it is important to center the discourse once more on the memory of the victims. Every one of the infants whose life was cut short by the actions of Janine Jones had a future that was stolen, a future of birthdays, milestones, and shared moments with their families that were erased by a calculated, selfish act. Their deaths were not just a series of clinical outcomes, they were the end of stories that should have lasted decades. The impact of their loss rippled through their families, creating a void that could never be filled, a grief that was deepened by the suspicion that their children's deaths were not natural. The finality of the legal resolution has provided a measure of peace, a way for the families to finally close that chapter, but it does not diminish the gravity of the loss. The memory of these children is the true, solemn legacy of this case, and it serves as the ultimate justification for every hour spent in investigation, every day in the courtroom, and every reflection on the importance of medical accountability. In looking back, we see a story that is as much about the capacity for human evil as it is about the capacity for institutional failure and the redemptive power of justice. The case of Janine Jones is a mirror that we must occasionally look into to ensure that we are maintaining the standards of care, transparency, and vigilance that are necessary to protect the most vulnerable among us. It reminds us that trust, while essential, must always be supported by robust, independent systems of oversight. The healthcare environment, with its complexity and its high-stakes pressure, requires a culture of constant, open communication where any anomaly is treated with the seriousness it deserves. The transition from the secrecy of the 1970s to the transparency that is the goal of modern medical systems is the ultimate, necessary progress born from these tragedies. We close this account with the understanding that while the crimes of the past are fixed in history, the lessons we draw from them are active, guiding, and essential for the safety of the future. The story of the San Antonio Hospital and the Kerrville Clinic is now complete, the legal processes have concluded, and the individual responsible for these tragedies is removed from society, yet the memory of the victims and the imperative to remain vigilant continue to live on, demanding that we never allow the sanctuary of the hospital to be violated in such a way again. The final, life-altering outcome for the perpetrator serves as a permanent, absolute, and fitting end to a long, dark shadow that had for far too long obscured the sanctity of life within the medical establishment. The final, enduring legacy of the Janine Jones case is not just found in the records of the Texas penal system, but in the profound, systemic transformation of how medical institutions perceive, monitor, and confront the possibility of internal malevolence. When we consider the arc of this case from the initial, quiet hospital room tragedies to the definitive legal conclusion in 2020, we are witnessing the long, arduous maturation of a society's response to the unthinkable. This case has functioned as a harsh, unyielding catalyst for the implementation of strict, evidence-based oversight in clinical environments where, previously, blind trust was the operating norm. The modern pediatric intensive care unit is a fundamentally different landscape than it was in the 1970s. It is characterized by layered, independent verification processes, digital monitoring systems that provide a granular trail of medication administration, and a culture that is increasingly trained to recognize the behavioral markers of an employee whose motives may be detached from the objective of patient recovery. This systemic evolution is the direct, positive byproduct of the very tragedies that the Jones case brought to light, ensuring that the vulnerabilities she exploited are no longer as easily accessible to those who might harbor similar, pathologically driven intentions. The psychological understanding of such crimes has also advanced in tandem with these systemic changes. We now have a much clearer, more forensic grasp of the hero complex and the various manifestations of Munchausen syndrome by proxy in medical settings, recognizing that the perpetrator's need for validation can override any empathy for the victim. This understanding is now integrated into the screening and ongoing supervision of healthcare staff, with a greater emphasis on peer observation and the identification of individuals who consistently seek out high-stress, emergency scenarios for their own gratification rather than out of genuine professional necessity. This shift in professional awareness is a vital defense mechanism, one that transforms the nursing and medical community from a group of individuals working in isolation into a networked, vigilant team capable of spotting and reporting inconsistencies before they manifest as fatal outcomes. It represents a move away from the insular, protected culture of the past and toward a more transparent, collective responsibility for patient safety that is essential in any environment where life and death hang in the balance. The narrative of these events also provides a deep, sobering meditation on the nature of justice and the tenacity of the human spirit. The long journey of the families involved is a testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply it is suppressed or obscured by institutional power, possesses a stubborn, irrepressible quality. The fact that justice was achieved after decades of waiting, after the initial, insufficient sentences, and after the persistent, strategic effort to bring new, damning evidence to the forefront, is a victory for the principle of accountability. It demonstrates that the law is capable of correction, of growth, and of persistence, even when faced with the most complex, historically distant, and emotionally taxing crimes. The families who refused to accept the initial, truncated version of the truth provided the moral anchor that held the entire investigation in place, ensuring that their children were not lost to history, but were acknowledged as the victims of a sustained, serial assault that required the highest level of legal response to address. Their story is a cornerstone of this narrative, reminding us that the pursuit of justice is not merely a bureaucratic function but a deeply human endeavor that is powered by love, memory, and an unwavering belief in the truth. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the San Antonio and Kerrville era must remain as active, guiding principles for the medical and legal communities. We must never allow the discomfort of addressing a potential angel of death within our ranks to eclipse the fundamental duty we owe to the patients in our care. This case is a permanent, warning sign that asks us to constantly evaluate our systems, to question the silence that often follows an unexplained medical decline, and to recognize that the protection of the innocent is a standard that cannot be compromised by considerations of institutional reputation or administrative convenience. The story of Janine Jones is now firmly established in the records of criminal history, a closed chapter that nevertheless serves as a foundational text for understanding the intersection of medical practice and pathological violence. It is a cautionary record that will continue to educate future generations of doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and investigators, ensuring that the failures of the past are not replicated in the systems of the future. Ultimately, the resolution of this case provides a sense of final, deserved closure, an end to a nightmare that for too long hovered over the lives of those touched by it. The life sentence for Janine Jones, affirmed and solidified in the final years of the investigation, serves as a fitting, absolute conclusion, a definitive answer to the decades of suffering and the persistent, unanswered questions that followed the loss of so many infants. It is a conclusion that restores the balance of justice, confirming that the most egregious violations of the sacred care bond will be met with the full, unyielding force of the law. As we process the totality of this story, we are left with a profound, solemn recognition of the fragility of life and the immense responsibility inherent in the act of caring for another. The memory of the victims, the strength of the families, and the ultimate, late-arriving triumph of justice together define this case, leaving us with a clearer, more vigilant understanding of our duties to one another. The shadow of the crimes has been dissipated, and the truth, in all its devastating detail, has been laid bare for all to see. We move forward from this account with a renewed, sharpened commitment to the safety of our most vulnerable, a commitment forged in the fire of these tragedies and upheld by the enduring, unshakable belief that justice, regardless of how long it takes to arrive, is the only possible, acceptable conclusion for the lives that were so cruelly taken in the sanctuary of the pediatric unit. This serves as our final, lasting reflection on the case, a comprehensive, moral, and historical record of a struggle for truth that has reshaped our understanding of the medical world and the power of persistence in the face of absolute, systemic betrayal, leaving us with the certainty that those lives will forever be remembered as the true, central focus of this historic search for accountability and peace. The conclusion of this chronicle necessitates a final, reflective consideration of the profound shift in how we interpret the duty of care within the medical profession. The case of Janine Jones, now etched into the annals of criminal history as a stark warning, has fundamentally altered the discourse surrounding patient safety and the oversight of healthcare environments. We began this exploration by observing the fragile nature of the intensive care unit, where the barrier between life and death is managed by those in whom we place our absolute, unreserved trust. We conclude by recognizing that this trust is not an absolute state, but a dynamic, evolving process that requires constant, vigilant verification. The systemic failures that allowed a predator to manipulate this trust for over 5 years in San Antonio and later in Kerrville have served as the bedrock for a new paradigm in medical administration, one that prioritizes radical transparency over the preservation of institutional image. The transition from the era of defensive silence to an era of proactive accountability is the most significant consequence of these tragedies, a change that has undoubtedly spared countless other families from the same unimaginable loss. This institutional maturation is matched by a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of the psychological pathologies that can infiltrate the clinical workspace. The hero complex, once viewed as a vague, perhaps even positive trait in a high-stress medical environment, is now recognized as a potentially lethal manifestation of narcissism that must be monitored with extreme caution. The ability of a healthcare professional to prioritize their own emotional gratification, specifically the thrill of the rescue, above the long-term, stable recovery of the patient, is now correctly identified as a critical red flag. This shift in the collective consciousness of the medical field is a direct, hard-won lesson from the lives taken by Janine Jones. It necessitates a culture of peer observation that is supportive yet uncompromising, ensuring that no individual is permitted to operate in a vacuum of authority, especially in settings where they have direct, unsupervised access to life-critical medications. The integration of these psychological insights into the training of medical staff is a crucial advancement, one that acknowledges the human element of medicine and the importance of safeguarding both the patients and the professionals themselves from the dangers of unchecked ego. The legal dimension of this narrative also leaves a lasting mark on our understanding of justice, particularly regarding the long-term pursuit of truth in the face of complex, historically entrenched obstacles. The state of Texas, in its eventual determination to secure a definitive, life-altering outcome for the perpetrator, set a powerful precedent for the prosecution of serial medical offenders. By refusing to accept the limitations of the initial trial and by relentlessly pursuing additional indictments as evidence and technology allowed, the legal teams involved demonstrated that the passage of time does not diminish the state's obligation to the victims. This commitment to justice is the definitive response to the institutional cowardice that characterized the early years of the case. It stands as a powerful, final statement that the theft of a life, no matter how subtle or clinical the methodology, will be met with the full, unwavering weight of the law, regardless of the challenges involved in excavating the truth from the silence of the past. The legal resolution of this case is not just a triumph for the families, but a victory for the integrity of the justice system itself. Furthermore, the impact of these events on the families remains the most significant, emotional heart of the entire narrative. Their sustained, decades-long battle for recognition and justice provides a blueprint for resilience that is both heartbreaking and profoundly inspiring. They were the ones who refused to accept the narrative of natural tragedy, the ones who kept the memory of their children alive, and the ones who ultimately forced the doors of justice open when they had been firmly locked by institutional indifference. Their journey is a testament to the fact that the loss of a child, while a trauma of unimaginable proportions, can also be the catalyst for a commitment to truth that eventually changes the system. Their stories are now a permanent part of the history of this case, ensuring that when we remember the crimes of Janine Jones, we do so not as an academic study of pathology, but as a recognition of the real, tangible lives that were irreparably altered. The peace they have found in the finality of the 2020 verdict is a peace they fought for, earned, and deserve, and it stands as a marker of the completion of their long, difficult quest. As we bring this comprehensive, 9-part account of the Janine Jones case to a final close, we are left with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the responsibility that we all share for the safety of the most vulnerable. It is a responsibility that extends from the administrative boardroom of the hospital to the bedside of the patient, and into the chambers of the justice system. The case of the angel of death is a mirror that we must keep before us, a reminder that the sanctuary of medical care is not immune to the darkness of the human heart, and that our only defense is a culture of unyielding vigilance, radical transparency, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. The shadow that once cast such a long, terrifying darkness over the San Antonio and Kerrville medical communities has finally been fully dispelled by the clarity of the evidence, the force of the law, and the relentless, collective insistence of those who refuse to forget. The systemic lessons have been absorbed, the legal accounts have been closed, and the individual responsible for these tragedies has been permanently contained, ensuring that the legacy of this case will continue to protect future patients from the horrors of the past. We conclude with the solemn acknowledgement that while this case is now a matter of record, its influence on the development of modern medical ethics and criminal justice will endure for generations. The transformation of the medical establishment from a system that once failed to protect its patients into one that is increasingly capable of self-correction is the most positive, lasting outcome of this dark chapter. It serves as a definitive, final reflection on the resilience of the truth and the essential, non-negotiable nature of justice in a civilized society. The tragedy of the infants whose futures were stolen will forever remain a profound, silent witness to the necessity of our ongoing efforts to safeguard the sanctity of life. The story ends here, not with a simple, tidy resolution, but with a complex, thoughtful integration of history, law, psychology, and human struggle, all centered around the ultimate, enduring commitment to ensuring that the events that define the life and crimes of Janine Jones remain a singular, never-to-be-repeated catastrophe in the history of medicine. We have followed this journey from the very beginning, navigated the darkest complexities of institutional and individual betrayal, and arrived at the final, firm conclusion that justice, though arduous and demanding of our greatest resolve, is the ultimate, necessary requirement for honoring the lives of the innocent who are lost, and for building a safer, more vigilant future for all who seek the comfort and protection of medical care. This is the end of our account, a complete and final record that stands as a testament to the truth, the memory of the victims, and the long, difficult path to a final, lasting peace. The final chapter of this long and agonizing history serves not only as a summation of the legal battles and institutional failures that define the case of Janine Jones, but also as a definitive statement on the enduring necessity of moral vigilance in the practice of medicine. As we conclude this 9-part examination, we find ourselves standing at a vantage point that allows us to view the totality of the tragedy with a clarity that was impossible during the chaotic years of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The journey from the initial, hidden poisonings in the San Antonio Pediatric Unit to the final, life-altering courtroom sentencing in 2020 has been a path carved through the dense, obfuscating fog of institutional denial, the crushing weight of systemic inertia, and the sheer, relentless persistence of the families who refuse to be silenced. This case has become more than just a crime story. It is a fundamental, historical touchstone for the intersection of clinical practice, psychological pathology, and the absolute requirement for transparency within the healthcare system. The transformation we have witnessed, the shift from a culture that protected its reputation to one that now prioritizes the identification and removal of threats to patient safety, stands as the most critical legacy of these events. The memory of the victims, those infants whose lives were extinguished before they could even begin, must remain the central, unyielding focus of this account. Their loss was not an abstract medical statistic. It was a profound, irreversible disruption of human potential, a theft of futures, and an anchor of grief for the families who were subjected to years of being told that their children's deaths were natural or coincidental. The persistence of these families, who served as the primary, tireless advocates for the truth, is the true engine of the legal progress we have documented. Their commitment to seeking justice, even in the face of daunting, systemic resistance, serves as a powerful testament to the capacity of the human spirit to endure trauma and transform into a demand for accountability. The fact that their voices, eventually, were heard, and that their persistent suspicions were validated by the cold, hard science of forensic toxicology and the unwavering determination of the prosecution, is the ultimate justification for every legal action taken in the name of their children. The finality of the 2020 verdict is a triumph for their cause, a necessary closure that honors the sanctity of the lives that were so cruelly taken. Furthermore, we must reflect on the broader societal implications of this case, particularly the lessons it provides for the future of patient care. The case of Janine Jones has become a mandatory study in the dangers of the hero complex and the ease with which a caregiver can, if left unmonitored and unchecked, transform their role from a provider of comfort into a harbinger of death. We have explored the chilling realization that the most dangerous environments are those where trust is assumed rather than verified, and where the hierarchy of the hospital protects those in power from scrutiny. This case compels us to demand a standard of care where transparency is the baseline, where all incidents are meticulously reported, and where the culture of the medical establishment is one of radical openness. The advancements in electronic record-keeping, the rigorous oversight of controlled pharmaceutical access, and the improved protocols for the reporting of adverse events in pediatric settings are all tools that were forged in the shadow of this tragedy, ensuring that the vulnerabilities she exploited are no longer as easily accessible to those who might harbor similar, dark intentions. The legal journey itself, marked by the challenges of decades-old records and the necessity of reevaluating cases that had long been considered closed, provides an essential blueprint for how the justice system can and must respond to the long-term, serial nature of medical predation. The prosecutors who meticulously built the case for the additional indictments in 2017 demonstrated that justice is not limited by the passage of time, nor by the disappearance of primary evidence. Their approach, which synthesized clinical data, eyewitness accounts, and a thorough, forensic reconstruction of the events, serves as a model for future investigations into systemic or historically significant medical serial crimes. The final sentence of life in prison is a conclusion that aligns the law with the severity of the crimes, ensuring that the shadow cast by the angel of death is permanently contained within the walls of the correctional facility. It is a resolution that satisfies the requirements of justice, providing a definitive, concluding answer to the decades of waiting and the persistent, unanswered questions that had haunted the community since the first alarms began to sound in the hospital ward. As we bring this entire endeavor to its final, definitive close, we are struck by the gravity of the lessons learned and the profound, transformative power of the truth. This account has been a journey through the darkest corners of the human experience, a navigation of the institutional failures that allowed a predator to thrive, and a celebration of the resilience of those who fought to bring that predator to justice. The narrative ends here, with the understanding that while the crimes of the past are now a fixed and immutable part of history, the impact they have had on our understanding of medical accountability is living, active, and essential for the future. The memory of the infants will endure as a silent, powerful, and ever-present witness to the importance of our collective vigilance, ensuring that the sanctuary of the pediatric unit is forever protected from such a betrayal. We conclude with a deep, solemn respect for the truth, a profound gratitude for the dedication of those who serve the cause of justice, and a renewed, unwavering commitment to the protection of the innocent. The shadow of the crimes has been dissipated by the light of the law, and the truth, in all its devastating detail, has been laid bare for all to see. The systemic failures have been exposed and addressed, and the person who violated the most sacred trust has been permanently removed from the society she so profoundly betrayed. This is the conclusion of our narrative, a complete, exhaustive, and ultimately moral accounting of one of the most significant and heartbreaking series of crimes in modern medical history, leaving us to contemplate the delicate, precarious nature of the care we entrust to others and the enduring power of those who speak out to ensure that justice, however long it takes, is finally served in full. The story, now fully recorded, stands as a lasting warning, a testament to the victims and a final, permanent closing of a chapter that has redefined our understanding of medical safety, institutional responsibility, and the absolute, non-negotiable requirement for truth in the healing profession. We are left with a final certainty that the safety of the future is built upon the lessons of the past, and that by honoring the truth of these events, we provide the best possible protection for those who walk through the sliding glass doors of our medical institutions, trusting in the hands that will watch over them. The final word on the saga of Janine Jones resides in the delicate balance between the darkness of her deeds and the transformative power of the justice that followed, a testament to the persistent human need for closure in the wake of absolute betrayal. As we step back from this expansive 10-part exploration, it becomes clear that the narrative has transcended the specifics of a single serial killer. It has become an essential study of institutional integrity and the fragile, sacred nature of pediatric medicine. The case serves as a permanent, cautionary landmark, reminding every generation of healthcare professionals and administrators that the protection of the most vulnerable is not merely a professional obligation, but a foundational moral imperative. The transition from the secrecy of the 1970s to the transparency of modern clinical practice is the most significant progress born from these tragedies. It represents a hard-won victory for patient safety, ensuring that the warning signs, the statistical anomalies, the behavioral inconsistencies, and the systemic lapses are now met with immediate, rigorous, and transparent investigation. The legacy of these infants, who were never afforded the chance to grow, lives on in the protocols and safeguards that now shield others, effectively turning a narrative of senseless destruction into a legacy of institutional vigilance. We must also contemplate the role of the legal system in addressing crimes that possess such deep, multi-generational roots. The journey from the initial, insufficient sentences of the mid-80s to the definitive life imprisonment secured in 2020 is a powerful demonstration of the persistence of justice. It underscores the reality that the law, while often constrained by the rigid frameworks of its era, possesses the capacity for evolution when guided by persistent advocates and evidence-based rigor. The legal teams who refuse to let the cold cases fade into obscurity, the prosecutors who painstakingly reassembled the forensic puzzle decades later, and the families who maintained their pursuit of truth through years of uncertainty, these individuals are the true architects of the final resolution. Their effort proves that time does not diminish the culpability of a predator, nor does it extinguish the necessity of the state's obligation to the victims. This case has effectively set a new standard for the prosecution of historical serial offenses, providing a roadmap for how justice can be served even when the barriers of time and institutional memory seem insurmountable. The psychological dimension of the case, specifically the enduring enigma of the hero complex, continues to challenge our understanding of human motivation and the potential for pathology to masquerade as dedicated service. The ability of Janine Jones to manipulate the clinical environment to serve her own need for recognition remains a chilling study in the subversion of the caregiver role. It forces us to ask critical questions about how we screen, supervise, and mentor those who operate in high-pressure clinical environments. We must recognize that empathy and professionalism are not inherent in a medical degree. They are cultivated in environments that reward transparency, peer support, and, most importantly, the honest reporting of errors. The case has taught us that the mask of the angel is most easily maintained in cultures of silence, and that the only way to expose the predator is to foster a workplace where concerns are voiced freely and where the well-being of the patient is the absolute, non-negotiable priority. This understanding has permeated modern medical education, shaping a new generation of nurses and doctors who are trained to be as vigilant about the integrity of their colleagues as they are about the health of their patients. As we conclude this overarching narrative, we are reminded of the immense, irreplaceable weight of the loss experienced by the families. No verdict, regardless of how final or how severe, can return the lives that were stolen or undo the trauma that was inflicted. However, the finality of the legal resolution provides a crucial sense of closure, a way to acknowledge the reality of the crimes without the corrosive shadow of uncertainty. The families have finally seen the truth formally recognized, the perpetrator permanently removed from the society she betrayed, and the historical record definitively set right. Their resilience throughout this process has been the true guiding light of the entire saga, a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not just a legal process, but a deeply personal, human undertaking that demands courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Their ability to find peace in the wake of such a tragedy is a testament to their strength and a standard of grace that we must all respect as we finalize this record. The broader impact of the Janine Jones case on our societal understanding of healthcare, justice, and accountability cannot be overstated. It is a story that has redefined the boundaries of what is acceptable, what is expected, and what is required in the medical profession. We look at this history now not with a sense of lingering mystery, but with a profound, solemn recognition of the responsibilities we bear toward one another, especially toward those who are unable to speak for themselves. The legacy of the infants lost in San Antonio and Kerrville will continue to serve as a silent, powerful, and ever-present witness to the importance of our collective vigilance, ensuring that the sanctuary of the pediatric unit is forever shielded from the kind of darkness that defined those years. We leave this narrative with a firm, unshakable conviction that the truth, no matter how obscured by time or institutional power, will ultimately be brought to light. The shadow of the crimes has been thoroughly dispelled by the clarity of the evidence, the force of the law, and the relentless, collective insistence of those who refuse to forget. The systemic failures have been exposed and addressed, and the person who violated the most sacred trust has been permanently removed from the society she so profoundly betrayed. This is the conclusion of our multi-part account, a complete, exhaustive, and moral accounting of one of the most significant and heartbreaking series of crimes in modern medical history, leaving us to contemplate the delicate, precarious nature of the care we entrust to others and the enduring power of those who speak out to ensure that justice, however long it takes, is finally served in full. We are left with the final certainty that the safety of the future is built upon the lessons of the past, and that by honoring the truth of these events, we provide the best possible protection for those who walk through the doors of our medical institutions, trusting in the hands that will watch over them. The case of the Angel of Death is finally, completely, and permanently closed, leaving us to move forward with a renewed, sharpened, and eternal commitment to the sanctity of life and the unwavering necessity of truth.